Hi everybody, I'm Amy LaBelle from LaBelle Winery and the Winemaker's Kitchen. Today I wanted to share with you a really quick, cheap, easy recipe for making fresh tortillas at home. If you're like me, your kids are eating through everything in your house and you might not want to run to the grocery store to grab tortillas if you run out of them. And we know tortillas are so flexible. You can use them for quesadillas or tacos or tostadas. There's so many uses. You can use them as wraps for sandwiches. So this is a staple for us in my home. I need them on hand at all times. If I run out or if I'm feeling like I have a few extra minutes, fresh ones are so much better. So let me show you. They're super easy to make. I'm just gonna make 1.5 cups worth today. But you can make double, triple, quadruple this recipe. These freeze beautifully, so you can kind of make a mess one time and then, not keep making messes over and over again. You can just freeze them and use them as you need them. But again, so easy. This costs pennies on the dollar instead of buying them. So what we have here is everything we need to make them. It's just 6 simple ingredients from your pantry, stuff you probably already have on hand. I like to get all my recipe ingredients ready before I start a recipe. I do that because it makes me not forget an ingredient and it makes things organized and easy to follow. In the French word, this is called mise en place. And you might know that if you followed my pasta recipe a couple of days ago. Mise en place is just a fancy French term that means everything in its place. And this way, if you get distracted or if the phone rings or if your kids call you in the middle of your recipe, you won't say, did I add the salt? Because you'll know. If it's still in the bowl, you didn't add it. So I love to get my recipes ready this way. We talk about this a lot in our classes at LaBelle Winery for our cooking classes, just to make sure you're ready and organized and you're gonna get everything delicious in that recipe. All right, let's go. I've got 1.5 cups of flour, just all-purpose flour. Again, I do prefer King Arthur flour, but any all-purpose flour is fine. I've got 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I like to use sea salt, not iodized salt for cooking. I think iodized salt kind of messes with the flavor of recipes a little bit, slightly metallic in taste, and you don't need all of that iodine. So I like to use sea salt. I think the flavor is awesome. I have extra flour for dusting. That's not really an ingredient. I'm just going to need it on my clean counter to do my work. I have baking powder, double-acting baking powder. If you haven't replaced your baking powder in some time, do think about getting a new one. Baking powder does have a shelf life and it kind of isn't as active after about a year in your pantry. I go through it pretty quick here, so I don't usually have to worry about that. And if you don't know, let me tell you that it's called double-acting baking powder for a reason. That's because baking powder is what gives your bread lift or rise. So it's one of the things you can use to make sure that your bread is got a little puff to it, right? If you're not using yeast. It's called double acting because it does that twice or in 2 ways. It does it when it gets wet and it does it when it gets hot. So both instances are going to cause that to rise up for you. So that gives you some puffs. Your bread's not just kind of flat. I also am going to need 1/2 cup of hot water and 1/6 cup of vegetable oil. You can also use lard or shortening, but I really prefer to use vegetable oil for my family. That's where I'm at. So you need just a bowl of any kind will do. You can do this in a stand mixer, of course, but I wanted to show it to you by hand today because you don't need anything fancy to make these. You can just use what you have. 1.5 cups of flour. In it goes. We're going to do all of our dry ingredients first and blend those. So you've got 1.5 cups of flour, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and that's for dusting my board. And I need 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. That's our most important ingredient to give us that lift. So you want to whisk that all together so that you can spread around those ingredients and make sure that they're well incorporated. And then we can add our 1/6 cup of vegetable oil. And I've got some hot water on the stove here. I did heat it up, but you don't want to add boiling water. That's not needed. Just hot is good. If you had really hot tap water, that's probably fine too. I'm going to do 1/2 cup of that. In it goes. And you'll see that hot water is kind of important because it helps begin to activate that baking powder, and it really gives you a nice puffy lift to this dough right away. So let's kind of incorporate the wet into the dry and get that out of your whisk. And then we're just going to turn this out onto a board. At this point, you can really get your kids involved. They love this part. And I make my kids help me in the kitchen all the time. It's wonderful family time. And it's wonderful, you know, time without electronics. It makes them talk to you and tell you all their secrets. So I encourage you to bring your kids into the kitchen to cook, because I think it's great family memories. And then when all this craziness is over and we're not all stuck at home all the time, they won't remember the virus. They'll remember all the great memories you made cooking together. So you want to work this dough a little bit. It's a nice, see, it's kind of like a shaggy dough right now, see? But it's coming together. I should have used only one hand to do this and kept one clean, which I think I'll do now. Keep one of them kind of dry. But this dough doesn't get to be too messy, so it's not bad. All right, this is coming together nicely. You're going to start to knead this. The proper kneading technique is to use the heel of your hand when you push, and then you gather it up with your fingers. You push it forward and kind of fold it over. Push it forward, gather it up, and you just continue to do that until you've incorporated all of the flour on your board. And our board here, in my case, it's just my countertop. It's a clean counter, and I simply, you know, gave it a good wipe down before we used it. And that's fine. You can use what you have. You can also use a board, a cutting board or marble if you have it. That would be fine too. And you see this dough is coming together beautifully. Now you want to assess at this point. You don't want this to be too crumbly. And I feel like this dough needs just a tiny bit more water. And that is fine. You don't want to overdo it though. So I'm going to just put a little more water in my measuring cup. I don't want to add it right to the dough, so I can be really careful about how much I'm adding. And I mean like the tiniest amount. And as you can see, this dough is going to start to loosen up, and you'll see it getting puffy. Now, if you think you added too much water, that's no problem either. I want to reflour my board here so I don't stick. Just add a little more flour. You really can't make any mistakes. It's so easy. So we're working our dough, and it's starting to be great. This is a great job for the kids to do. They can knead the dough. They can also begin to form the little balls that we'll use to make the tortillas. It's nice if you have the time to let this dough rest. So if you don't need to go right into making the tortilla, it's really nice if you can wrap it and let it rest. I have one that's wrapped and rested. My trusty assistant is going to throw it to me. Boom. Through the magic of television, I have a wrapped and rested one. If you want to go right into the tortillas, you can, but if you wrap and rest, look what happens to the dough. It gets so stretchy and beautiful to work with. So if you want to just wrap it in some saran wrap and set it aside for a few minutes, that's a fun technique. You don't have to, but I think it makes it easier. All right, now I'm going to put a little more flour on my board, and this is the part that the kids like to do with me. If you form a ball in your palm and then roll it around. It's about the right size. But if you're making tostadas, you might want to make teeny tiny tortillas. If you're making tacos, you might want to make them a certain size. Make them whatever size you want. This is your kitchen. Now you want to roll these out. You can do this by hand, but I like to do it with a rolling pin so I can get them nice and thin. It doesn't matter if they're perfectly round. They're homemade. They don't have to be round. They're not made in a factory. This one's kind of, you know, weird shaped, and that's okay. still going to be delicious. This will make some nice quesadillas for lunch today. So you really do want to get this pretty thin. This is looking perfect. Look at this. Look at this dough. You can kind of see through it. It's pretty thin. I want you to see the texture of it. It's very stretchy. See that? All right. So now what you want to do is have a hot pan waiting. Behind me, I have one that's done, so I can show you. Just in a frying pan, you do one at a time. In a skillet, you end up with a gorgeous golden brown tortilla that looks like this. It's going to be really delicious for lunch. Yep, melted with some cheese, and your family will be delighted. If you need more information about this recipe, feel free to send me an email, amy@LaBelleWineryNH, like New Hampshire.com. And if you'd like to see some other recipes, follow us on our YouTube channel at LaBelle Winery. Thanks for joining us in the Winemaker's Kitchen today. We'll see you soon.